Marcus Chen stood at the entrance of the Crystal Ballroom in downtown Chicago, watching security guards twice his size block his path. Behind them, the annual Defense Innovation Summit buzzed with conversations worth billions of dollars. CEOs, generals, and government officials mingled freely inside, but this unassuming man in a simple navy suit couldn't get past the velvet rope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know was that 23 years ago, Marcus had single-handedly prevented a nuclear disaster that would have changed the course of history. And in exactly 4 minutes, a voice from his past would shatter the comfortable assumptions of everyone in that room. The morning had started like any other Thursday for Marcus Chen. He brewed his coffee in the small kitchen of his modest apartment in Oak Park, fed his elderly cat Winston, and reviewed his notes one final time. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of formal communication that immediately commanded respect. The Defense Innovation Summit wasn't just another conference. It was the premier gathering where military leaders, tech innovators, and policymakers shaped the future of national security. This year's theme focused on emerging cyber threats, and Marcus had been specifically invited to present his research on quantum encryption vulnerabilities. For the past 8 years, Marcus had worked as a cybersecurity consultant, operating from a cramped office above a Korean restaurant. His clients were mostly small businesses worried about ransomware attacks, nothing glamorous. But his real expertise lay buried in classified files that most people would never see. The taxi ride to the Palmer House Hotel gave Marcus time to mentally prepare. He'd rehearsed his presentation dozens of times, anticipating questions about mathematical proofs that could make or break military communication systems. The research represented 3 years of painstaking work, building on theories he'd first developed during his time with a government program that officially didn't exist. The Crystal Ballroom occupied the entire second floor of the historic hotel. As Marcus approached the registration desk, he noticed the caliber of attendees streaming past him. A woman in Air Force dress blues chatted with a man whose company logo he recognized from defense contracts worth hundreds of millions. Another group discussed satellite technology in hushed tones, their conversation peppered with acronyms that would sound like gibberish to civilians. Name, please. The registration volunteer, a cheerful woman in her 50s, smiled as she scrolled through her tablet. Marcus Chen. I'm presenting at 11:30 on quantum encryption. Her smile faltered slightly as she scrolled back and forth through the list. I'm sorry, I don't see you registered here. Are you sure you have the right event? Marcus pulled out his invitation, pointing to his name printed clearly below the summit logo. The volunteer examined it carefully, then called over her supervisor, a stern man in a charcoal suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a government training manual. Sir, this invitation appears to be fraudulent, the supervisor declared after a cursory glance. We've had issues with people creating fake credentials to gain access to classified discussions. That's impossible, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. I received this directly from the organizing committee. I have correspondence with Dr. Patricia Wellness about my presentation slot. The supervisor's expression hardened. Dr. Wellness has been coordinating this summit for 12 years. She would never invite someone without proper security clearance. He gestured toward 2 security guards who had materialized nearby. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Marcus felt the familiar weight of invisibility settling around him. Throughout his career, he'd grown accustomed to being underestimated. At 47, he looked like a community college professor, rather than someone who'd once held one of the highest security clearances in the government. His graying hair was perpetually slightly messy, his suits came from department stores, and he drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic. There's been a mistake, he said, pulling out his phone to show his email correspondence with the summit organizers. I can prove I belong here. But the security guards were already moving closer. Other attendees had begun to notice the commotion, their conversations pausing as they observed what appeared to be an attempted gatecrasher being removed from their exclusive gathering. One of the guards, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. Sir, you need to come with us. Wait, Marcus said, his mind racing through options. He could call Dr. Wellness, but her phone would likely go straight to voicemail during the summit. He could demand to speak with hotel management, but that would only create a bigger scene. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd once been trusted with the nation's most sensitive secrets couldn't convince a hotel volunteer that he belonged at a cybersecurity conference. As the guards began to escort him toward the exit, Marcus caught a glimpse of the ballroom's interior through the open doors. Massive screens displayed rotating presentations about artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons systems. Round tables seated influential figures whose decisions would ripple through military procurement for decades to come. His presentation materials felt heavy in his briefcase. 3 years of groundbreaking research that could revolutionize how the military protected its communications networks. Work that built directly on classified programs he'd helped develop when he was barely 30 years old, fresh out of MIT with dual doctorates in computer science and applied mathematics. The guards guided him through the hotel lobby, past curious onlookers and business travelers checking in for less secretive conferences. Marcus's face burned with embarrassment, but beneath that surface emotion, a deeper frustration simmered. This wasn't just about being denied entry to a conference. It was about being erased from the very community he'd helped protect. Outside the hotel, Chicago's autumn wind whipped between the downtown buildings. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, watching important people stream into the building behind him. His taxi had long since departed, and calling another seemed pointless. Even if he could find another way to contact the organizers, the damage to his credibility was done. He thought about the invitation that had sparked such hope 6 weeks earlier. The recognition of his work, the opportunity to contribute to something larger than small business cybersecurity consulting. For a brief moment, it had felt like his expertise might matter again. Marcus was about to walk toward the nearest L station when he heard a voice that made his blood freeze. "Dear God, is that Phoenix?" The voice came from behind him, near the hotel's main entrance. Marcus turned slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Standing 20 feet away, surrounded by a group of military officers, was a man he hadn't seen in over 2 decades. Colonel James Mitchell, though the silver eagles on his shoulders indicated he'd been promoted since their last encounter, stood frozen in recognition. His hair had gone completely white and deep lines creased his face, but his penetrating blue eyes remained exactly as Marcus remembered them. Those eyes had once looked at him across a situation room while nuclear weapon systems hung in digital limbo, waiting for someone brilliant enough and crazy enough to defuse a crisis that could have ended civilization. The other officers followed Mitchell's gaze, confused by their colleagues' sudden stillness. Traffic continued flowing down State Street. Hotel guests walked past, oblivious to the reunion unfolding on the sidewalk. For a moment, neither man moved. 23 years collapsed into nothing, and Marcus was once again the young genius who'd volunteered for an impossible mission because someone had to try. Colonel Mitchell's recognition cut through the Chicago street noise like a blade. The group of military officers around him turned to follow his stare, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they watched their superior officer's face drain of color. "Phoenix," Mitchell repeated, this time barely above a whisper. The code name hung in the air between them like a ghost from another era. Marcus felt his throat constrict. Nobody had called him that in over 2 decades. The last time he'd heard it spoken aloud was in a debriefing room in Langley, Virginia, where men in expensive suits had made it very clear that Phoenix had never existed, that the crisis had never happened, and that Marcus Chen would do well to remember neither. One of the younger officers, a major with sharp features and suspicious eyes, stepped closer to Mitchell. "Sir, do you know this individual?" Mitchell's gaze never left Marcus's face. Time seemed suspended as the colonel processed what he was seeing. The brilliant young man who'd once sat across from him in the most classified room in America was now standing on a public sidewalk, apparently barred from a cybersecurity conference. "Major Stevens," Mitchell said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of command, "I need you to take the others inside. Begin the morning session without me." "But sir, the briefing on the Chinese satellite interference." "Now, Major." The dismissal was absolute. Stevens hesitated for a moment, clearly wanting to understand what had captured his superior's attention so completely, but military discipline won out. He gathered the other officers and guided them toward the hotel entrance, their curious glances following the strange civilian who'd somehow paralyzed their colonel. Marcus watched them disappear into the Palmer House, leaving him alone on the sidewalk with the man who'd once held his career, and possibly his life, in his hands. Mitchell approached slowly, as if Marcus might vanish if he moved too quickly. Jesus Christ, Marcus, what are you doing out here? The question carried layers of meaning. What was he doing outside the summit? What was he doing in Chicago? What had he been doing for the past 23 years since he disappeared from the classified world like smoke? They wouldn't let me in, Marcus said simply. The absurdity of it hit him as he spoke. The man who'd once prevented a nuclear catastrophe couldn't get past hotel security. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mitchell's expression shifted from recognition to confusion to something approaching anger. What do you mean they wouldn't let you in? Don't they know who you are? They think I'm a fraud with a fake invitation. The colonel's jaw tightened. Marcus remembered that, look, it was the same expression Mitchell had worn 23 years ago when informed that traditional military solutions wouldn't work for the crisis they were facing. It was the look of a man preparing to bulldoze through bureaucratic obstacles. Wait here, Mitchell commanded, then caught himself. Old habits died hard, and Marcus no longer answered to military authority. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Marcus nodded, watching as Mitchell strode toward the hotel entrance, with the purposeful gait of someone accustomed to having doors open at his approach. Through the glass, he could see the colonel speaking animatedly with the same registration supervisor who'd dismissed Marcus minutes earlier. While he waited, Marcus's mind drifted back to the last time he and Mitchell had been in the same room. It was March 15, 2002, in a bunker buried beneath the Pentagon that didn't appear on any architectural plans. The crisis had been brewing for 72 hours, and every conventional approach had failed. The Chinese military had been testing a new cyber warfare program, something they'd called Project Crimson Dragon. What they hadn't realized was that their test virus had evolved, developing self-replicating properties that its creators never intended. It had broken free from their isolated networks and was systematically infiltrating nuclear command systems across multiple countries. The virus was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its potential. It didn't try to launch weapons. Instead, it corrupted the safety protocols that prevented accidental launches. Every hour that passed brought the world closer to a catastrophic malfunction that could trigger automatic retaliation sequences. Marcus had been 24 years old, barely 2 years out of MIT, working for a classified program that recruited mathematical prodigies to solve impossible problems. His specialty was finding patterns in chaos, building order from seemingly random data. When traditional cybersecurity experts admitted defeat, someone had suggested bringing in the weird kid who spoke to computers like they were people. The solution he'd developed still gave him nightmares. It required creating a counter-virus that was even more dangerous than the original threat. A digital weapon capable of rewriting fundamental computer architectures on the fly. The margin for error was microscopic. One wrong calculation, one misplaced line of code, and instead of stopping a nuclear crisis, he would have caused one. For 18 hours straight, Marcus had worked in that bunker, surviving on coffee and pure adrenaline, while Mitchell coordinated with world leaders who couldn't be told the real reason their nuclear arsenals were temporarily offline. The weight of civilization had rested on the shoulders of a young man who still got carded when buying beer. When it was over, when the counter-virus had successfully neutralized the threat and restored normal safety protocols, the celebration had lasted exactly 20 minutes. Then men in suits had arrived to begin the process of making the entire crisis disappear from history. Project Phoenix, as they'd called the operation, was sealed under classifications so deep that even acknowledging it had existed would be considered treason. Marcus was debriefed, sworn to secrecy, and strongly encouraged to find a new career path. The message was clear. His service was appreciated, but he knew too much to remain in the classified world. He'd tried to return to normal life, completing his doctorate and taking a position with a private cybersecurity firm, but the transition had been brutal. How do you go from saving the world to designing firewalls for insurance companies? How do you sit in meetings about preventing credit card fraud when you've seen what real cyber warfare looks like? Eventually, Marcus had struck out on his own, building a small consulting practice that let him work on interesting problems without the suffocating weight of government oversight. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it let him sleep at night. Now, standing outside the Palmer house, he wondered if that decision had been a mistake. Maybe he should have fought harder to stay in the classified world. Maybe he should have leveraged his Phoenix credentials to build a more impressive career. Through the hotel's glass doors, he could see Mitchell engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated conversation with hotel security. The colonel's posture had shifted into full command mode, shoulders back, voice carrying across the lobby, even though Marcus couldn't make out the words. Other summit attendees had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Marcus recognized several faces from defense industry publications, people whose companies held contracts worth billions of dollars. They watched with obvious curiosity as a full colonel argued with hotel staff about a civilian who'd been denied entry. The irony was almost too perfect. Marcus had spent decades in obscurity, convincing himself that anonymity was preferable to the pressures of high-level security work. Now, when he finally had something valuable to contribute again, when his research could genuinely advance national cybersecurity, he couldn't even get into the building. His phone buzzed with a text message. Dr. Patricia Wellness, the summit organizer, had finally responded to his increasingly desperate emails from that morning. Marcus, terribly sorry for the confusion. Your invitation was flagged by our security screening process due to classified background markers. Please see me at registration immediately. We need your presentation more than ever. Marcus stared at the message, understanding flooding through him. His background check had triggered automated security protocols. The same classification levels that had once given him unlimited access were now marking him as a potential threat. Through the glass, he saw Mitchell walking back toward the entrance, his expression grim but determined. Whatever conversation had taken place inside, it appeared to have reached a resolution. The colonel pushed through the doors, his face bearing the satisfied look of someone who just reminded several people exactly who they were dealing with. Phoenix, he said, loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear, they're ready for you now. The word Phoenix reverberated through the Palmer House lobby like a stone dropped into still water. Conversations halted mid-sentence as defense industry executives, military officers, and government officials turned to stare at the unassuming man in the Navy suit who had somehow earned recognition from a full colonel. Marcus felt the shift immediately. The same people who had watched his humiliating removal minutes earlier now studied him with newfound interest. Code names weren't used casually in their world. They represented operations so classified that even acknowledging their existence required the highest security clearances. The registration supervisor who had dismissed Marcus so confidently now looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. His face had gone pale as he realized he'd just ejected someone whose very presence at the summit had been personally vouched for by a colonel with access to information far above his pay grade. Dr. Wellness is waiting for you at the VIP registration desk, the supervisor stammered, his earlier authority completely evaporated. She's been looking for you all morning. Marcus followed Mitchell through the lobby, aware of the whispered conversations trailing in their wake. He caught fragments of speculation. Who was he? What operation was Phoenix? Why had a colonel used a classified code name in public? The questions would circulate through defense industry circles for weeks, generating theories that would never come close to the truth. Dr. Patricia Wellness stood behind a separate registration table marked with discreet gold lettering. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and the bearing of someone accustomed to managing classified information. Her relief was visible as she spotted Marcus approaching. "Mr. Chen, I cannot apologize enough for this morning's confusion," she said, extending her hand. "Your background triggered our automated security screening protocols. When classified markers appear without current clearance verification, our system flags the individual as a potential security risk." She handed him a platinum-level access badge that felt heavier than the standard conference credentials. "This grants you access to all sessions, including the closed-door briefings normally restricted to active clearance holders." Marcus clipped the badge to his jacket, still processing the surreal turn of events. An hour ago, he'd been suspected of fraud. Now he held access credentials that most attendees would never see. "Colonel Mitchell explained your unique qualifications," Dr. Wellness continued. "Given the current crisis, your presentation has been moved to the main auditorium. We're expecting over 400 attendees, including representatives from NSA, CIA, and Cyber Command." Quote, the current crisis. Marcus had been so focused on his presentation preparation that he'd missed the latest developments in the cyber threat landscape. His research on quantum encryption vulnerabilities was apparently more timely than he'd realized. Mitchell placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Walk with me," he said, guiding him toward a quiet corner of the lobby. "There are things you need to know before you go in there." They found a pair of leather chairs beneath an enormous crystal chandelier. Mitchell waited until they were out of earshot before speaking again, his voice dropping to the careful tones of someone sharing classified information. 3 weeks ago, the Russians launched a sophisticated attack on our military satellite networks. Not to destroy them, to infiltrate them. They've been quietly mapping our communications infrastructure, identifying vulnerabilities in our quantum encrypted channels. Marcus felt his stomach drop. His research had predicted exactly this scenario. Not Russian involvement specifically, but the mathematical weaknesses that made quantum encryption systems vulnerable to patient, systematic infiltration. "The attack vector they're using," Mitchell continued, "matches the theoretical vulnerabilities outlined in your research papers. The ones you published in academic journals 2 years ago." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. His theoretical work, published to advance scientific understanding, had potentially provided a roadmap for hostile actors to compromise American military communications. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, "I never intended." "Nobody's blaming you," Mitchell interrupted. "Academic research is supposed to be shared. But right now, you're the only person outside of Russian intelligence who fully understands how this attack works. And more importantly, you might be the only one who can figure out how to stop it." They sat in silence for a moment, watching summit attendees stream past them toward various conference rooms. These were smart, capable people. Generals who'd commanded troops in combat, CEOs who'd built billion-dollar defense companies, analysts who'd prevented countless smaller cyber attacks. But none of them possessed Marcus's unique combination of theoretical knowledge and crisis experience. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked. Mitchell's answer was delivered with the flat precision of a military briefing. "If they complete their infiltration, they'll have real-time access to our military communications worldwide. Troop movements, strategic planning, weapons deployment, everything. It would be like fighting a war with the enemy, reading our playbook in real time." The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a familiar coat. 23 years had passed since Phoenix, but the feeling was identical. The knowledge that his unique skills stood between national security and catastrophic failure. "The presentation I prepared," Marcus said slowly, "it's not enough. The countermeasures I outlined assume theoretical attacks, not an active infiltration that's already in progress." "That's why we need Phoenix back," Mitchell replied. "Not Marcus Chen, the cybersecurity consultant. Phoenix, the man who builds impossible solutions under impossible deadlines." Through the lobby's tall windows, Marcus could see Chicago's skyline stretching toward Lake Michigan. Somewhere in those buildings, in similar buildings across the country, people were going about their daily lives completely unaware that their national security hung in digital balance. It was Phoenix's job to make sure they never had to know. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie and checking his presentation materials one final time. The research he'd prepared would need significant modification, but the theoretical foundation was solid. He'd spent 3 years developing mathematical proofs that could revolutionize quantum encryption security. Now he had 90 minutes to weaponize that research into practical countermeasures. "Colonel," he said, falling back into the formal address patterns of their shared past, "I'll need direct access to NSA's Quantum Research Division and real-time data from the compromised satellite networks." Mitchell smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him since their reunion. "Already arranged. Dr. Sarah Kim from NSA will be in the audience with the secure terminal. Whatever you need, she can provide it." They walked toward the main auditorium together, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Marcus could hear the murmur of hundreds of conversations beyond the closed doors. Defense contractors discussing billion-dollar projects, military officers coordinating global operations, intelligence analysts tracking threats most civilians couldn't imagine. In a few minutes, he would stand before an audience of the most powerful figures in American national security and present research that could determine whether their communications remained secure or fell into enemy hands. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who couldn't get past hotel security an hour ago was about to brief the people who decided the fate of nations. As they reached the auditorium doors, Mitchell turned to face him one final time. "Marcus," he said, using his real name instead of the code name that had defined their past. "I know you've spent decades trying to live a normal life, but some people are built for moments like this. The country needs Phoenix one more time." Marcus nodded, feeling the transformation beginning already. The mild-mannered consultant was receding, replaced by the focused intensity that had once prevented nuclear war. He pushed open the auditorium doors and stepped into the lights, ready to save the world again. The audience fell silent as he walked to the podium, 400 faces turning toward the man who had been denied entry that morning. Marcus adjusted the microphone, opened his laptop, and began the presentation that would determine whether American military communications remained secure or fell into the hands of a hostile foreign power. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had stared into digital chaos and emerged victorious, "we have a problem, but fortunately, we also have a solution." The auditorium stretched before Marcus like an amphitheater of power. Tiered seating rose in concentric semicircles, filled with faces he recognized from defense industry magazines and classified briefings he'd read about in intelligence summaries. The lighting was deliberately dramatic, bright spots illuminating the speaker's podium while keeping the audience partially shadowed, a psychological trick that made the presenter feel simultaneously exposed and protected. Marcus connected his laptop to the presentation system, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. Behind him, a massive screen flickered to life, displaying his opening slide, Quantum Vulnerability Assessment, Theoretical Framework and Practical Applications. The title seemed almost mundane given the stakes they were facing. In the front row, he spotted Drive, Sarah Kim from NSA, her fingers poised over a ruggedized laptop that undoubtedly contained real-time data from compromised satellite networks. She gave him a subtle nod. Their secure communication channel was active and ready. To her left sat General Patricia Hayes, whose cyber command operations Marcus had followed from afar for years. Her presence meant this briefing would reach the highest levels of military leadership within hours. The audience's attention was absolute. These weren't academic colleagues politely tolerating another research presentation. These were people whose decisions affected global security, and they understood that Marcus possessed information they desperately needed. 3 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system, I published a theoretical paper on quantum encryption vulnerabilities. The mathematical proofs were elegant, the implications fascinating from an academic standpoint. I never imagined those theories would become a blueprint for actual warfare. He clicked to his next slide, displaying a complex diagram of quantum entanglement patterns. Quantum encryption was supposed to be unbreakable. The physics seemed ironclad. Any attempt to intercept quantum encrypted communications would immediately alert both sender and receiver. But physics, like any science, operates within assumptions. Change the assumptions, and seemingly impossible things become inevitable. The diagram shifted, showing how quantum states could be manipulated without triggering traditional detection methods. Marcus watched the audience lean forward, recognizing the implications even before he explained them. The Russians didn't break our encryption, he continued. They found a way to listen without interrupting the quantum conversation. Imagine wiretapping a phone call without the participants realizing anyone else was on the line. They've achieved the digital equivalent. Dr. Kim's laptop chimed softly, and she made eye contact with Marcus. New data was coming in from the compromised networks, real-time intelligence that would validate or challenge his theoretical models. The attack began with patience, Marcus explained, displaying a timeline that stretched back 18 months. They didn't assault our systems, they seduced them. Microscopic intrusions, each one designed to map our quantum encryption architecture without triggering alarms. They've been building a complete blueprint of our military communications network. General Hayes raised her hand, her expression grim. Mr. Chen, what's their current penetration level? Marcus glanced at Dr. Kim, who was rapidly processing incoming data streams. She held up 3 fingers, then closed her fist. A signal they'd agreed upon, meaning the situation was worse than initially assessed. Based on the latest intelligence, Marcus replied, they've achieved approximately 70% mapping of our primary military satellite networks. At their current infiltration rate, they'll have complete access within 6 weeks. A murmur ran through the audience. 6 weeks was barely enough time to implement countermeasures. assuming they could develop effective ones. However, Marcus continued, they've made a critical error. Their infiltration method relies on predictable quantum state manipulation patterns. They assumed our encryption systems were static, that we wouldn't notice subtle changes in quantum coherence timing. He displayed a new diagram showing quantum state fluctuations over time. These patterns create a signature, a digital fingerprint that reveals not just their presence, but their methodology. We can't just detect them now. We can predict their next moves. The presentation took on a different rhythm as Marcus shifted from problem analysis to solution development. He walked the audience through countermeasure theories that had never been tested outside computer simulations, mathematical proofs that existed only in his research notes. The solution requires creating what I call quantum noise, he explained. Deliberate interference patterns that mask our real communications while feeding false information to their infiltration systems. We turn their own listening posts against them. Dr. Kim was typing rapidly, her screen filled with code that was being transmitted in real time to NSA headquarters. Marcus's theoretical work was being converted into practical algorithms even as he spoke. Implementation won't be simple, Marcus warned. Every military satellite will need firmware updates that must be deployed simultaneously across global networks. A single delay, one satellite falling out of sync, and the entire countermeasure system fails. Colonel Mitchell, who had been silent throughout the presentation, stood up from his seat in the middle section. "Phoenix," he said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. "What do you need?" Quote. The question was delivered with military precision, cutting through academic discussion to focus on practical requirements. Marcus had prepared for this moment, knowing that his theoretical work would mean nothing without implementation support. "I need a team of 12 quantum physicists, access to NSA's most advanced simulation computers, and authorization to coordinate directly with satellite operations commanders worldwide," Marcus replied. "The timeline is non-negotiable. We have 48 hours to develop, test, and deploy countermeasures before their next major infiltration phase begins." The auditorium erupted in urgent conversations as defense officials began calculating resources, timelines, and authorization levels. Marcus watched powerful people make decisions that would allocate millions of dollars and mobilize classified resources based on his presentation. General Hayes approached the podium, her expression focused and determined. "Dr. Chen, you'll have everything you requested within 6 hours. NSA is establishing a classified workspace at Fort Meade specifically for this operation." "There's one more thing," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the rising noise level. The auditorium fell silent again, everyone recognizing the tone of someone delivering critical information. "The Russians aren't working alone. My analysis of their infiltration patterns suggests collaboration with at least 2 other nation-states. This isn't just an attack on American military communications. It's a coordinated assault on Western alliance networks." The implications hit the audience like a physical wave. An attack on American systems was serious. A coordinated assault on NATO communications represented an existential threat to global security architecture. Dr. Kim looked up from her laptop, her face pale. "Dr. Chen, we're detecting similar infiltration patterns in British and French military networks. The attack is more widespread than we initially assessed." Marcus nodded grimly. His worst theoretical fears were being confirmed by real-world intelligence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing the first truly global cyber warfare operation in history. Success or failure will determine whether Western military alliances can maintain secure communications in the digital age." The weight of responsibility settled over the auditorium like a heavy blanket. These weren't just American national security interests at stake. The outcome would affect the balance of global power for decades to come. As the presentation concluded, Marcus found himself surrounded by officials exchanging contact information, establishing communication protocols, and coordinating resources with the efficiency of people accustomed to managing international crises. The mild-mannered consultant who had been denied entry that morning was now at the center of the most critical cybersecurity operation in modern history. Colonel Mitchell appeared at his elbow, carrying a briefcase that undoubtedly contained classified materials Marcus would need for the operation ahead. "Welcome back, Phoenix," he said quietly. "The world missed you." Through the auditorium's tall windows, Marcus could see Chicago's afternoon light reflecting off the lake. In a few hours, he would be on a military transport to Fort Meade, leading a team of the nation's brightest minds in a race against digital infiltration that threatened to reshape global power structures. The man who had spent decades trying to live anonymously was about to become the most important person nobody had ever heard of. Again. Outside the Palmer House, Chicago continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in a hotel ballroom, Phoenix had returned to active duty to face the greatest cyber threat in human history. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.